Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's business building session. I'm Mike O'Neill with Bench Builders, and I'm going to be your host today for our Q&A session. Joining us today from Chicago is our expert panelist, Quinn Ferrall. Welcome, Quinn.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me here. Pleasure to be with you and Rhonda today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
We are too. And you mentioned Rhonda. My colleague Rhonda Beard is again with us this morning. Rhonda's going to be providing some kind of updated information that we think employers will find interesting. Good morning, Rhonda.
Good morning, Mike, and thanks for joining us, Quinn. Looking forward to talking with everybody this morning.
Absolutely.
We launched these Q&A sessions really to try to bring experts together like Quinn and Rhonda to kind of help business owners, key leaders, and HR professionals stay on top of what's important, the things that you need to stay on top of to grow your business. I'm going to, give you a little bit of sense of what you can kind of expect. This is going to be recorded, as you probably already know, and therefore anybody who has registered will be receiving a link to this recording. That link will also include the slide deck that we're using this morning. Also, this is a Q&A session, and as a result, we would like to hear from you. For some reason, I can't figure out how to use the Q&A option, so we're using the chat box. So if you would open the chat box and have that available, that is how we're going to hear from you on your questions. And what I'll just do as we're going along, I'll be monitoring your questions, and I'll try to get as many of those answered today while we are recording live. So that being said, let me just kind of give a little bit of sense of kind of what you can expect. Here is Quinn. We've asked Quinn to join us because I was intrigued by Quinn on a couple of levels. Quinn is the founder of Infinite Humans, and I got to know him through another organization that I got to know him, and I just found him personable. And of particular, what I found with Quinn, he's just easy to listen to, and I hope you will find Quinn to be just the same. Quinn, good morning. Let's do this. Let's get started, and rather than me introduce you, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right. Thanks for that, Mike. I would describe myself, and you saw the term there, humaneering. For me, my background, I come by it honestly. My grandfather was an architect. My parents were architects. My grandfather was an engineer. My parents were architects. My degree is in civil engineering, and I've been in engineering and sales and management for the past 20 years. What I found through my career, and even I guess it started when I got my MBA, there was a human side of engineering, and I find as we got more and more technology was coming into, we see some of the things happening in this industry where, the things I used to get paid to do, namely calculations and running that kind of, rote design stuff is all being done, not all, but most of it's being done by computers now. And so how do we transcend that? Well, you become more human. And where, when I got into sales and started dealing with other people, that was the piece that really resonated with me. And so how we, prepare ourselves for the future really means leaning into being humans and letting the technology do what it does. Because if we're going to be successful really in any industry going forward, it's going to take collaboration and creativity. And, those are the things that computers can't do. So let the technology handle, the busy work, so to speak, and let us do some of the, the creative part of it.
You provided this term humaneering, and if you go to your website, the name of your company is
I don't know if it was me, Mike, but I lost your audio feed there for a second.
Oh, okay. Am I back now?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you are. Yep.
All right. My apologies on that. Why did you name the company the name you did?
Well, for me, I look at, we have infinite creative potential. And, you may have seen, I think our most underutilized resource in the world right now is human potential. And, I think if we tap into the, the infinite possibilities of what we can do, the world will be a better place. So.
For those who have not had a chance to go to Quinn's website, one thing that you introduced to me, and I just see over and over again, Rhonda and I see this in our role, we see this idea of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence oftentimes is abbreviated EQ. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
What does that mean? What does the EQ mean?
Yeah, so I mean, it's an emotional quotient. If you think of intelligence quotient for IQ, and really what you're trying to do is, what are the traits around? There's four kind of fundamentals of EQ, and so it's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and then relationship management. And it really, in a nutshell, if you think about emotional intelligence, is how are we aware of and how do we manage what we're doing, because we have our rational brain and then we have the emotional core of our brain, and how we process those two. So we have different parts of our brain talking to each other, and the intelligence comes from how good are we at recognizing and managing that relationship between those two parts of our brain.
I'm not going to go to the slide, but here's what the slide would read. You defined EQ. I think Oxford Dictionary defines it this way. It's the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathically. That's a big word, empathically. What does that mean to you as an engineer and as someone who sells to technical folks and coaches folks like that? What does that mean to you?
Well, it's a funny thing, because a lot of people look at me and say, emotional intelligence and engineering is not an oxymoron, and it's something where I can, one of my favorite questions to ask people is, show of hands, who considers himself emotional, and depending on which group I'm talking to, you'll get some people that raise their hands, some that don't, and more engineers don't. And the response there is, that's your emotions telling you not to raise your hand. So it's a trick question. We're all emotional. We just tend to suppress or hide behind some of the rational thinking there. And so for me, the piece there and in the empathy part is understanding how others think, and putting they said put yourself in somebody else's shoes, which I think about is put yourself in somebody else's shoes, but don't put so much of you that they're not there either. You don't want to just be wearing their shoes. You want to actually see their perspective. And, from engineers, sometimes it's all about, the numbers, the facts, let's just talk, nuts and bolts. And they don't realize behind every bit of data, there's an emotion or there's a person tied to that. And, the more we get into that, and understand what those are, because even, what's interesting is, computer programs and the things that we create, and we think, oh, it's technology. Well, it was created by a human. And so there's bias in that, just like there's bias in us as humans. And your bias is just our preferences or how we see the world. One of the biases that we all have is we tend to think that people think like us. And engineers like to think a lot. So we think that a lot of people like to think a lot like us. So we're kind of down that rabbit hole of our thinking is the best way. And so, while that can help you solve complex problems, it can also limit you to being able to interact with people who don't understand you or speak like you. And so what I really try to do is extract, what does it mean to, think like somebody who's very technical. And a lot of the sales and stuff that I do, I'm generally talking to somebody who doesn't know the tech. I look at, if I'm going to help you out with your building, you're going to want to know how much it's going to cost, how long is it going to take, and what's the disruption going to be to my business. Well, that has nothing to do with the technical aspects of what it is I'm bringing. And so it's understanding what that impact is to the other person, so that you can provide the best product, but not focusing just on the product. You got to focus on the experience or what the other people are need from you.
Quinn, what we've learned about you is you're very entrepreneurially minded. You have a very successful sales business, that is, you rep for companies. And if I heard you correctly, that means that you're calling on folks that may not be as technically minded as you are. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most, I'd say 95% of the people I talk to aren't engineers. And so, they need what I'm selling, but they don't need to know about what I'm selling to the degree that I'm doing. So, it's trying to make that product relevant to them. We talk about coatings and things that we use. And one of the things I tell people, there's an analogy, you put a $10 tree in a $100 hole. And that means you've got to dig a big hole to make sure that the roots grow and all that stuff. And if I'm putting something on your building, a lot of the preparation work, it goes into that. So if I'm putting a coating, I'm gonna say, imagine putting a bumper sticker on your car. you're probably going to spend about 10 minutes cleaning your bumper, and then you're going to spend a minute putting it on there. That lets people see in a real way, okay, all right, they're going to be up there for 2 or 3 days preparing the roof, and they're going to be up there a day, putting the coating on, and it kind of gives them something they can latch onto. If I get up there and just talk about the chemical properties of the coating or the preparation, those are things that, if you're not in the industry, you don't understand it. And I see that, it's not only in this industry, I see that across the board. When we get too jargony, that's the thing. Part of emotional intelligence is being able to understand, where the other person's at and meeting them where they're at. And so if you just come in and start bombarding, imagine, thinking about, like, if I'm a nutritionist, right, and I look at that a label on food, there's 20 words on there I can't pronounce or even know what the heck they are. And to most people that we're talking to are outside of our industry, that's a lot of what we're saying sounds like that nutrition label. We need to get it down to basic terms that convey what they're trying to do.
So Quinn, what I understand is in your in one role, you are a technical person calling on non-technical people. So you have to be mindful of how they look at the world, and they look at the world maybe differently than you do, and you would have to adapt. I think that embodies emotional intelligence, at its core. You also use the term, you got to be able to walk in their shoes. I fumbled through the word empathically, but I think what I'm hearing you say, and one reason we were interested in having you as one of our panelists, it seems like every other posting makes some reference to emotional intelligence. And we wanted to kind of be able to offer maybe someone who really understands this, because that is what you do part of your time, but then you also work one-on-one with fellow engineers, helping them improve their emotional intelligence. So in that case, it's an engineer to engineer. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, work with, groups of engineers too. It's an interesting, again, and you do see this all over Google, I think you had Emily on a few weeks back. She talked about Project Aristotle. They did another study, Project Oxygen, and they're a really interesting one because everybody thinks of Google just being this technical company. They're really finding it's the human aspects of things and really getting in touch with the people that make the difference. In a lot of these places, and I use this analogy too. I don't ever want to drive over a bridge that wasn't designed by an engineer. That design, there's a standard that's set there. But there was a study that was done at MIT where they look at all the people who are there, and success, you've got to get into MIT, there's a high bar that's been set. But once you're in there, where you are on the spectrum of EQ, the higher your EQ actually was more corollary to being successful later in life. And so, that's the thing, because you can relate to more people and you're bringing, more people together. And I think that's the thing that we're seeing now, especially in this world. There aren't the, lone designers or the maverick leaders. We're having to come together, as the world, is in chaos and disruption that we've never seen before. It's the power of community that's going to help us. Well, if you're, on an island by yourself or can't relate or communicate with other people, you're not going to, thrive in that environment. And so it's really, how do you take what you do at your core and express that and relate that to, your, coworkers or your partners on other teams or even clients and getting beyond yourself.
Quinn, I think I shared with you before we came together in our prior conversation that our typical customer falls into one of three categories. They own a business, they run a business, or they are driving HR within a business. And so we're trying to keep that audience in mind.
Sure.
But are people born with emotional intelligence?
They are. It's an interesting, we're born, we kind of have it, and it's not a certain thing. It is a, it's a quotient, and it's on a spectrum. Some people are naturally empath, or and it comes by naturally. Some of that is nature nurture. They're in that environment and they came up around it. So we have natural proclivities for it. And just like intelligence, people say it's a little more fixed. It's not as fixed as we think it is. There's some neuroscience and stuff out there that's really showing how, our brains are a little more plastic or flexible. We can be lifelong learners, but we really can be lifelong EQ learners. And the good news there is, I can be, 80 years old and still becoming more empathetic or more in tune with this EQ. And, because it's a skill like anything. Once you practice it, you get better at it. And that's an interesting thing to think about too in the world. Technical skills, or the hard skills, traditionally what we call them, are usually degenerative. When I learn a program, think about your operating system on your computer, Windows, for instance. When Windows comes out, they're already working on the next version of it. And so you're working on technology, or when you get a new iPhone, they're already working on the next phone that's coming out. So those skills are going to be replaced by something else. When you learn EQ and you practice it, the more you're practicing it, you're getting better at it. And so that's actually a generative skill. And so you're actually getting better at it. And the value of that skill grows the more, as you use it more, and as time passes, it actually becomes stronger and stronger. And so, when we think about, and having that higher EQ allows you to have a more open mindset and be in that growth area where you can pick up new skills. And so those other, as those other things are changing, you're more adaptable to picking them up instead of just, going to school. I mean, there's interesting studies now where it used to be, you go to school and your degree would last you 20 years. There's some studies now where degrees that you can get, and they're almost obsolete, the year after you graduate, because that's how dynamic, the computers or the technology, the stuff that you're learning about is changing. And so we're really going from this learn something, apply it, to learn and apply in this, regenerative model where we're going to continue to keep learning and keep applying as we go.
Quinn, I've never heard it described that way. That was a very good way of emphasizing that IQ can actually degrade over time. In fact, it does degrade, but you're saying emotional intelligence can, with practice, grow. Jason writes in the chat box that EQ, in his opinion, and perhaps the opinion of most, is the biggest differentiator between good leaders and a great one. He says even more so than IQ. Not to put you on the spot, do you agree with Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it gets you that you have to have those skills, right? And I don't want to, again, take that away from, there are hard skills that we need to learn, but just coming in and with those isn't going to, again, it's going to make you good. It's not going to make you great. And being able to pull those together. I also look at it this way, IQ lets you, tells you how smart you are. EQ tells you how smart the room is, or the team that you're on, and being able to, snap those pieces together and get more out of, collectively, we are, the sum, what is it? The sum total of, the group is bigger than the individual pieces, and that's the thing where if you look at that, that's where, I got a thing where I talk about the exponential power of EQ, and jokingly say EQ equals MC squared. And it's just EQ equals meaningful connection squared. And what you get, the power of EQ comes from being able to multiply the collective intelligence of the people that you're working with, and to make it greater than any one part together would be.
I mean, you're giving some great illustrations of EQ. Earlier on, you made some reference to EQ. It breaks down into, you describe it as 4 components. Can I get you to come back to that to help us better understand what is EQ and what are those 4 components you're referring to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the simple part is, okay, so you start with self-awareness, who am I? What am I feeling in certain situations? Because if we don't understand ourselves, then it really becomes hard to see that in other people. There's another interesting piece of that, though, is, sometimes the hardest person to see is yourself. There's a phrase, you can't read the label when you're in the bottle. And so sometimes you need to get, feedback from other people, and feedback can be a great tool for really, identifying who you are. If you look at self-awareness, I think something like 5% of the population is actually self-aware, whereas 70 to 80% of people think they're self-aware. And ironically, most of the self-aware people don't consider themselves as self-aware as they are, because they recognize how difficult that can be. But trying to really understand, what triggers you in certain situations, why do you feel the way you do, and understanding how that, how you show up affects, how you're going to, see the world. is the first pillar. So when you start with understanding yourself, then you see, okay, what are the triggers and the ways that I feel in certain situations? How do I behave? Then you can start with self-management. So it's saying, okay, I can recognize those. There's a good one. Feelings are like waves. We can't stop the waves, but we can decide which ones we want to surf. And so, being aware of them and being aware of which ones you want to latch onto. The one thing that I see come up a lot of times is, if I was to say to you, what does an emotional person look like? And especially you say that in workplace, well, that's a person who quick to anger or overly cries about everything, or we take it to this extreme, and oftentimes we see it with a very negative connotation associated with it, instead of saying, okay, what about the person who's really passionate? What about the person who is really caring and is a good listener? There's other places to look at that, and how we emotions aren't good or bad, they just are. It's what we do with them. Anger can be something that can be channeled into passion and can drive you forward to get something, make a change happen. We're seeing that in the world today. And so that management piece is saying, okay, what are we going to do with it now that we're aware of it? Now that we kind of understand ourselves and how we are in the world, then we start looking out beyond ourselves and looking at those around us and say, okay, so I recognize these emotions in myself. Can I recognize those emotions in others, see how they're feeling, so that I can meet them where they're at and match up with them? And then you take that next step would be the relationship management, and how do you relate between the two of you? It's not just recognizing where they're at, it's how do you communicate with them? How do you get them to see, eye to eye with you, and how are you come together? And each one, will be up and down. That we're not always going to be, we tend to have natural strengths. We can work on either one. And the fun part is, the more you work on one piece, it folds into the others. So you're always kind of, I look at it as a circle, and it's all kind of flowing in and out of each other. And so, there's not any one that, sits on its own, but the four of those together kind of make the table that is, or the legs to the table that is EQ.
So why don't we use that? The four legs of the table being EQ. You mentioned self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Can we do a little more drill down on each of those? And in practical terms, you said that the vast majority of people think they are self-aware and they're not. Mm-hmm. What does a person who's self-aware, what means, how can they be self-aware, and why are so many people wrong about self-awareness?
Well, it gets back to, we see, the biases that we have, and we see the world, that either we think more people agree with us, or we think more people think like us than we do. And you're seeing it from your perspective. And, one of the things there is, ask for that feedback. Another quick thing you can do is look for people either in life that you're dealing with, or even in, movies and stuff like that, characters that annoy you. It's a funny thing, but we always assume that somebody else does that. But the things that annoy us oftentimes are things that we do ourselves. And so when you see those annoyances, you can kind of, maybe there's a mirror here I can put up to myself and see, what is going on. We did a listening exercise the other day with some clients, and that's one of those things. Do you consider yourself a good listener? And again, most people will, but then they're also, we found, studies show that most people will interrupt somebody, within like the first 10 seconds of them talking. And so, how much are you aware of how you interact with other people? Do you interrupt them? What are the things that you're doing? And we don't even notice it. One of the things interesting, like when we talk, public speaking, people say, or, you don't hear yourself saying, when you're doing it, because, it's that piece in between your thoughts. And so that self-aware person just takes time to take a step back and really look at how you are, and how you're interacting with people around you.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is it's most people's natural tendency is to assume that the person they're interacting with looks at the world the same way they do.
Yes.
And that's using just one of the senses, but have feelings similar to the way you would have. And I guess what I'm hearing you say is that 5% who really are self-aware truly recognize that might not be the case, and therefore How does that apply? I mean, if you're recognizing that the person you're interacting with is different than you, that first step of being aware of that is important.
Mhm.
But what I'm hearing you say is it sounds as if being aware can inform how you manage yourself, as that's when you moved into that second category, self-management. Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, that's a great way of describing it. And the thing too is this is something where, you don't stop these things from happening. Just like I said, you can't stop the waves. It's just how close do are you aware of what's going on, and how do you get back to to center, instead of when somebody's getting under your skin, for instance. Like, you think about it, you get more and more angry. You get worked up. People say, I'm getting worked up. Well, what is that that's working you up? And why are you getting to that place? And think about yourself when you are frustrated and you're in that position. How do you behave then versus when you're in a calm, relaxed, and that's the piece is trying to, that self-management is really, how do you regulate yourself to stay more at an even keel? Not that you don't want to just take all emotions out of thing and just be an automaton, but you want to recognize that there's going to be this ebb and flow. But when you get knocked off of center, how do you get back to it? And what is it that's knocking you off? And how do you come back? And that's the part that I have friends who've been doing this for 25 years, and they're like, look, my husband still pisses me off, or like, there's things like that, but I don't let it happen. It doesn't ruin the rest of my day. I recognize what's happening, and I say, why is that? And then you can come to that place where you can actively manage it, and then you come back to center instead of just letting it derail you for the rest of your day, sometimes weeks. I mean, you think about, somebody says something bad to you on a Monday, and you're still thinking about it on Friday. That's one of those things where what is it? What's the emotion there? Why are you holding on to that instead of being able to process it and let it go?
The slide that's on the slide deck starts with, it's a circle, so it doesn't really start,
Yeah.
but we're visually envisioning the circle is divided into quadrants. The upper left-hand quadrant is self-awareness. The upper right-hand is self-management. Let's move on to social awareness. You mentioned that is being aware not just of the person you're interacting, but being aware of others essentially in the room. Is that what that means?
Yeah, in the room, or how you're talking to people on your team, or even one-on-one. But it's looking at and being able to pick up the the cues from where they're at. Again, it's instead of just assuming they're kind of where you're at, or somebody's giving you're picking up on verbal cues or the visual cues. It's just saying, okay, where is this person at? Instead of you come into a room and you just got off a call with your best friend and you're excited, and this person just found out they got fired, right? And you're still all happy. It's like, recognize, hey, they're probably not where you're at, and they probably you need to regulate yourself to kind of where they're at. Or if you're giving your team something, some challenging information, don't dismiss it as this is just what we have to do, this is the decision. It's recognizing, hey, we see that this could be challenging, this is going to affect you, this is going to impact you, and really paying attention to what is it impacting them, how could it potentially be impacting them, what is the feedback they're giving you, recognizing that, so that when you're interacting with them, some people, you think of the worst part of this would be, you hear people being tone deaf. That's kind of what it is. Like, they're just not able to, pick up on what somebody else is saying, or, or is expressing, and you just keep doing whatever you're doing anyways.
You mentioned the word tone deaf, meaning they're just clueless.
Absolutely, that's it, right? I mean, it's it's either somebody's really sad, and you're just acting like nothing's happening, or they're really happy, and and you're just dismissive. It's not understanding kind of where they're at, or even, I mean, I've seen this in some extreme cases where, like, people don't understand what's going on, and there's that confusion there, and instead of taking the time to explain to them, or figure out why there's a breakdown in communication, you just say, well, you don't get this, you just must be above you, or you're not, you're stupid if you don't understand this, right? I mean, in a real crass way, and it's not saying, okay, well, why is this confusion here, or why are you expressing yourself this way? What's going on that I need to to pay attention to, so we can have a meaningful conversation.
So why don't we complete the circle of the four: awareness, self-management, social awareness. The last one that you listed here was relationship management. How does that factor into the other three?
Well, this is, again, it's bringing together once you recognize yourself, you recognize how you're regulating yourself so that you're kind of, making sure you're aware of how you're expressing yourself, and then you're seeing how other people are, and then you're reaching out to them, kind of meeting them where they're at, and doing it in a way that's going to provide a meaningful conversation, and that's just effective communication. It gets back to which ties into effective listening, and being able to recognize the interesting one too is this is the difference between you'll see some people are good one-on-one, but then they're horrible in a crowd. And those are two different skills, but they're both social management, and there's different things that you can do to increase your skills in those areas. But that's the sort of thing that you've got to be aware of, that every conversation isn't going to be the same, and you need to meet the conversation where it's at, or where it needs to be, to have effective communication, and really kind of knowing your audience, and knowing how to work with them, I think is to put that in very plain terms.
One of the things we've tried to do here, Quinn, is we're trying to pack into much less time that which you normally have the luxury of an hour or more to explain. And
Yep.
what I don't want to do is leave you hanging here. What might be some things that the folks who are listening to this recording or watching us live, what are some things that we might not have covered that you think is important for folks to know about EQ, and particularly how EQ factors into working with technically minded folks?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is don't I don't say get intimidated by it, but it sounds like this big nebulous thing, or what is I don't really understand it. There's a lot of neuroscience, there's a lot of things you can get lost in the weeds on it. If you start with nothing else, you take nothing else away from this, it's start with that point of really trying to be more self-aware. One of the things I talk about is remaining neutral, and if you can not frame everything as good or bad, it's just different, and it just has it may not be the way you're thinking about it, or it may not be your perspective, but get curious about those differences, and let people if I come in and you say something, I'm like, Mike, you're completely wrong. Am I going to get the full story from you, or am I going to understand where you're coming from if I lead with that kind of jab? It's like, you never get somebody to come to your side by throwing rocks at them. So if we just start with a very neutral way, and just open up, and the fun part is if you start, the more you start doing it, the more it builds on itself, and it becomes easier and easier to do, and it expands. So, look at it that way. And then, also look at, say technical people, non-technical people, one of the big things I say, they just don't get it. Well, if they don't get it, is it maybe that you don't get them? And if you can start at that place of, really get curious, try to understand them, and open up the space. I think a lot of times what we do too is we assume things can't happen. Zoom is a great example of this, and what we've seen. And Kevin showed a few weeks back on how do you put zip in the Zoom. I mean, I've heard people say, we can have these conversations over Zoom. It's just not it's not a place you can connect. And I've seen the complete opposite. And I've had some of the most meaningful connections with people around the world have been in this very format. And so if you say, hey, we've created this space is for it, and you really open it up and let it be that, what also will happen is say, hey, I want to know how you feel, and then you discredit that, or you discount it and say, well, you've got to be prepared and willing to hear what somebody has to say, even if it's not what you want to hear or what you thought they were going to say. And that's the real thing. So it's just start small. Don't overcomplicate it, but just become more aware. And as you become more aware, you'll see more opportunities to really, expand on, this idea and these conversations. And you'll see that it will, the fun part too is this is something that happens. I can use this with you now. I can use it with my waiter at the, at the restaurant. I can use it with my kids, my wife. I mean, this is something, EQ affects every piece of, my life. And so it's something where, what you're doing at work and what I'm doing, at home, they complement each other, and it gives me something, to really, it makes everything better.
Quinn, you have a gift of explaining what can be complex in a way that I understand, and I appreciate you sharing that gift. If you will, we'd like to have you stick with us for a few more minutes, and I'd like to come back to you because this EQ topic is something that Rhonda and I encounter quite a bit. We try to stress the importance of it, but you explained it in a way that was extremely helpful. Rhonda, I'm going to move to you for a moment because Quinn made reference to today's environment, how things have changed and changed so quickly. And with COVID, it has almost upended everything. Has that impacted, from your perspective, the employees that we're all, as leaders, calling on and working with?
Well, thanks, Mike. And that's great points that we've talked about and kind of talked around in many of our webinars as we try to encourage employers to really listen to employees and listen to what they're going through right now, because it's an extremely tough time for businesses, for individuals, for leaders, for human resources, for financial people. I mean, it is a tough time that nobody's had time to plan for, nobody's dealt with before. And so a lot of our webinars, we have touched on the importance of listening and talking to your employees, which I think is a dummied down approach to saying you got to have some EQ in there. But some of the distractions employees have right now, I mean, people have personal distractions all the time. And when leaders in the past have said, separate your personal life from your business, from your work, you can't do that. And it's even more difficult now because they're more commingled than they have been in the past. So not only do employees have the distraction of just plain old COVID, there's so many other things now around that. And last week we spent quite a bit of time talking about the uncertainty of what schools are going to be doing. And if you're a working parent or a double working parent family and have to be at work, and you don't know if your kids are going to be in school yet, at home, some mixture, how do you handle that? How do you plan for it? What resources are out there? So, that's one more layer of uncertainty and distraction for employees on top of not knowing their job security. Some companies are very busy, some are slow, some have closed down, opened back up, changed their business, changed their approach, changed their way of offering services or products. So employees have been going through so many changes and uncertainties, don't know what the economy is going to be like next month, next year, don't know who our president is going to be and what that might look like. So there's so much going on right now that if employees seem to be unproductive, they probably are. A lot of people working from home, I think we heard from Melissa a couple weeks ago, people working at home are pretty productive. But that could be up and down too, just depending on what's going on in their lives and what they might be having to deal with that day. But again, just keep in mind with your employees that they have so many distractions right now that are on their mind, and nobody can plan for anything. And for people who are structured, organized planners, it's even more difficult for them because they can't plan anything right now because you don't know what next week is going to look like. So, just a few tips to try to help out with some of those distractions and uncertainties that employees might be dealing with. First of all, as many people are business leaders on this call and that will be listening to it, it might be difficult when we say this and you say, oh, no, we can't do that. But employees first, business second. Take care of your employees, because if you don't, you're not going to have a business. They're going to run your business for you if you take care of them. If you don't, you're not going to have a business to run. So think about your employees first and what their needs are, how you can help them, how they can be more productive, and what kind of changes you can make within your business or the way you're managing them or communicating with them that'll make it easier for them to be productive and ease their mind with some of the things that they might be dealing with. So on top of all the personal stuff that they're dealing with, if there's any way to ease their mind about their job or their job security, definitely try to do that. Although we know in businesses that may be difficult with many as well. We talked last week about being flexible with people that have a lot of uncertainties, particularly working parents or people who may have family members that have COVID or they're caring for or they've been exposed, or there's so many different scenarios right now. Try to be flexible with your employees. to the extent that you can in terms of their work schedule, their work hours, whether they're working at home or in the office. And again, that's not possible for everybody, but where it is possible, try to have that flexibility with people, and they'll definitely come to appreciate that. I think one thing Quinn said that resonates with me quite a bit, and I've used the phrase a lot, is walk in their shoes. Try to understand what they're going through. Put yourself in their place. And you might be experiencing the same things your employees are, which does make it easier for you to listen and understand and work with them. But if you're not, try to put yourself in their shoes and understand what they're going through and try to help them as much as you possibly can. Constant communication, just stay in touch with people. Sometimes managers may think, well, if people need something, they'll come to me, so I'll just wait for them to come to me. Well, don't wait for them to come to you. Talk to them and find out what's going on with people and how you can potentially ease their burden. Be patient, definitely demonstrate patience with people as they're dealing through this, and provide training. Another comment, Quinn, which I really like, is learn and apply, learn and apply. If you've trained managers, that doesn't necessarily mean you train so they've got it. Training needs to be a continuum, a constant upgrading of skills. And one of the best things you can do for your employees is to invest in their training, invest in skill building, and they're going to do a much better job for you. But some of the topics right now that really are most prevalent, and this has changed so much in 2020 from what we thought leaders might be dealing with this year, but leading change. Helping managers figure out how to get employees on board when things have to change. Because I guarantee you, every single company and every single business has experienced changes that you weren't planning on this year. So how well are people handling that? How well are they adapting to it? And how are your leaders contributing to that? Because they can make the biggest impact on how employees accept and adapt to change. So leading change is huge. Just communication. You can never do enough training or encouraging on communication, which most importantly involves listening. Listening is the most important part of communication. And we do a lot of training around listening. And, Quinn mentioned doing some of that as well. But a lot of people don't focus on listening as part of communication. They focus more on the speaking part and how to say things. And that's important too, but listening is much more important with your employees. Problem solving. Are we dealing with problems right now? Absolutely. So how well equipped are your managers with techniques and tools to work through and help employees solve these problems, not just business problems, but personal problems? And that's something that managers have really not wanted to in many cases or been involved in before, is helping people with their personal problems. So, helping your managers with how to deal with these things as they come to them, helping employees with their problems, listening, leading change, and then just employee engagement. What types of things are going to keep your employees engaged right now? And you can't necessarily decide and assume what that is. You have to ask people, and that comes obviously from communicating. So ask people what's important to them. The more you talk to them and the more you listen, the more they're going to open up. And the more they open up, the better equipped you're going to be to provide them what it is that they need. So communication is extremely important. And I think, a lot of the things that Quinn has said about EQ definitely goes into that. Understanding what people are going through and really taking an interest in people is going to go a lot further with your employees than knowing everything. And your employees are the ones that are going to make your job easier if you work with them and you help them and you provide the support and interest in their well-being. So definitely make a point to talk with people and find out what's going on with them so that you can help them personally through what many people are going through right now, multiple chaos issues, multiple chaotic situations. I talk to friends and neighbors and family every day who are all dealing with different things. And it's different for everybody. With some people, it's kids. With some, it's parents. With some, it's their job. With some, it's being laid off and not being able to find a job, or working at home and not knowing if your kids are going to be home or at school. So there's so much going on in people's lives right now that we really need to help them on the job as much as we can to alleviate that insecurity, that uncertainty, and the burdens that they might be. So yeah, something else we all might need training in is psychology, right? Dealing with people is psychology, and we don't all have it. But if you can just listen and be patient and put yourself in their shoes, it can go a long ways in working with your employees.
I can listen to you, Rhonda. I can see how what you've shared and what Quinn is sharing, how it kind of dovetails very nicely. Quinn, I want to come back to you just for a moment. Before we started recording, you shared that this is your third call today, and I'm speaking to you on Eastern time. I think you may be on Central time, but if I understand correctly, you've got a client in Great Britain. And was that a Zoom call or telephone call?
Zoom call.
Zoom call. And you said earlier, but I wanted to put you on the spot. They are in another country on different time zones. Matter of fact, that call was at 4:30 your time. Can you, in your experience, be effective using Zoom and be still sensitive to the things that we've talked about? Can you pick up on the cues such that you are addressing them using your emotional intelligence?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm not saying that they're different, but not better. I mean, it's one of those things where, there's definitely, and I'm a people person, and I appreciate a cup of coffee with somebody, and there's things that you can get one-on-one in a personal thing, but it's not to discount that you can't make similar connections. They're different but equal kind of thing, and that's the pieces. If we limit and say, well, we can't do this, then you're not going to be able to do it. But if you show up and say, we are going to connect. And in some ways it's interesting because especially dealing with people that you, aren't, don't necessarily have a deep relationship with already. Some people find Zoom, especially when we go into breakout rooms, if you're not recording, feel like you're in a more comfortable place. Just the fact that I'm at home right now, lets me kind of relax a little bit more than, if I was in a, convention hall where the AC may be turned down too low or too high, or, I'm in, not in a normal place. So, I think instead of looking at it, one way is wrong or one way is better, it's just saying, okay, what can I do to make the best use of the situation that I have? And how can I really lean into what I'm doing right now and understand that I'm going to tailor, I think I told you before, usually my hands are up and, you can see me, if we were in person, you'd probably think I was Italian. I'm doing a little bit more with my hands. That doesn't always come through, and I don't necessarily, need that, or I'm going to reach out and touch you on the shoulder. I mean, there's some things there that are going to happen. I can't do that, but, I can lean in, or I can just hear you in a way. And I think those things really come out. And the hear piece, it was something, Rhonda was talking about listening. One thing I like, differentiate between is, we all listen, but how many of us are really hearing? One question to really ask yourself and ask other people is, when's the last time you felt really heard? And think about what that, listen is something that, listen just happens. Here, you actually have to be a little bit more active to hear. So that's something that when we are trying to connect with people, it's really making sure that you're hearing the other person, not just listening to, to what they're saying. And I think the other one, that came up when Ron was talking to, for me, is we talk about the golden rule, which is do unto others is, you want them to do unto you, but the platinum rule is do unto others as they want you to do unto them. So it's really, asking what do they need, and each of our, coworkers, the people, our direct reports, the people on our teams, people in our family, we all need different things right now, and understanding what that is and getting that. But the other thing is we can't lose sight of, while we all have our individual needs, our businesses, our families, our, groups all have needs themselves. And we have to look for these opportunities, be, I like the term symbiotically selfish. We're both working towards a combined goal that serves both of us. And it may, sometimes you have to give up a little bit of yourself to the whole to get that greater, that maximum, potential, that exponential potential we were talking about before with the meaningful connection, the greater sum of the whole will give back to us more if we allow it to. And instead of holding back and restricting, say, well, that's not exactly how I want to do it, so I'm not going to, it's like, if you commit to it, it will commit back to you. And so looking for those areas where, it's going to be different, but it's all going to be in that same, that's where that, purpose and, values come together. And, that's how we transition through these areas where we have, difficult, we all are making difficult decisions. But if we are aligned and going in the same direction, and you meet their people at a human level and say, we want the best for you because we want you to be able to provide for your family and do that. And by providing for the company and making sure we're doing the best things for the company, we can feed each other throughout this process.
Quinn, we've gotten some comments come in while you were speaking. I want to try to practice what it is that Jason's recommending, and Christina Hooper is also kind of echoing, and that is COVID hit and we're all having to adapt.
Right.
But we're embracing technology where it makes sense. Zoom is one thing that we're kind of talking about. Jason says this is one of his hacks, and that is resist the temptation to look at the screen, but to look straight into the camera if you're going to truly connect with someone. That's a very, very good point. So Jason, I'm going to try to do a better job with that. And Christina has stressed, she advises us, Christina's a good friend, and she's advised us that these webinars are really intended to stay in connection with folks, be it clients, be it friends, whatever it might be. But if it's informative, it's a way of connecting. Rhonda, I'm going to ask you, you know the kind of work we do with bench builders. Have you found that we can as effectively do what is it we do via Zoom as we were doing in person?
Well, I think you have to make some adjustments, obviously, to be effective in that. And you have to change the way you do things. For instance, with some of the training that we've done in a class actually that I taught, you can do it virtually, but you can't necessarily do all of the same things that you would do in person. So with training, for instance, you may need to modify the content, modify doing things through breakout sessions versus role plays. And it's not always going to work the same, but it can work, absolutely. And I think the comment about the camera, I catch myself a lot of times too. You want to look at the people, but you want to look at the camera. So I think we need to suggest that they need to embed a camera in the middle of a monitor screen, and that would be really helpful. But absolutely being able to, you can still see people's facial expressions. You can still read body language. And I think like Christina said, I feel the same way. If I join a call and I'm on video and other people are not, you just see their name on there, you don't feel quite as connected, and you kind of feel like, well, they're probably not tuned in. They're just doing something else and they're on here to be on here. But seeing people definitely helps an awful lot in the world that we're in today. Not quite as good as being in person, but I think definitely if you make some adjustments in the way you do things, it can definitely help you connect with people. Much better than just a phone call.
Thank you. We actually have another benefit too, whereas you said something earlier, Quinn, that caught my attention. As you're speaking, I'm writing. I'm learning from the expert panelists the same way that the folks who are participating. One of our past panelists, Steve Hillis, has a question for you. I want to ask of you, Quinn, and that is the role of the Myers-Briggs or DISC or the like. Can that be helpful as you're working with folks to better understand them and where they're coming from?
Absolutely. Those are all great indicators. There's, it's like anything. It's not the be all end all. And there's a few other ones. There's EQ 2.0. There's a couple other EQ assessment tools, and those are great because they do give you an understanding. The caution there is sometimes people get their personality type and they think that's who they are, and oh, that's just who I am, or oh, I've got to be this person, because it's let it inform you, and it's a good idea of where you were to the point that you took the assessment, but don't let it define you. And you can say, oh, I can see that tendency, and that's what they are. They're tendencies. But just like we have, people are situationally one thing at work, or there's something else at home. That's another good way to kind of see who you are at your core, is recognize how you behave differently in different situations. And then it's something where take it a year from now, if you're actively doing these things and trying to be more aware of who you are. See if anything, changes in there, and it can kind of give you an indication. So yes, believe in their value, but it is definitely not a silver bullet. And I don't believe any of this. I mean, if anyone tells you they've got the one solution, there isn't one thing that you can do. It's a lot of little things that you've got to continually do, and continue to do, or it's just not gonna happen.
All right, I do appreciate that. I'm going to try something here. I don't know if I'm going to mess things up and trying to do this. Am I sharing screen again?
Yep.
Okay, so what I'd like to do, if I can, just so for folks who are with us right now, these are the slides that you will be seeing, and here's some of the points that Rhonda actually made. I want to do a couple of things as we kind of wrap up. One, I wanted to just remind folks that this Q&A series was designed to bring experts kind of like you, Quinn, and we've got on deck another expert. You already know Rachel, and I'm getting to know Rachel in this process. Rachel Druckenmiller. It's a great name to remember. You will really want to sign up and spend time with Rachel. She works with leaders and teams to kind of help build resilience and improve relationships, and she's going to be doing, I'm sure, a very kind of just a jam up job. So I'm going to go ahead and plug Rachel just for a moment. I also want to kind of echo something that Rhonda was making reference to, and that is, in the time that we're in right now, we got to be mindful as leaders that your employees, they're going to remember how their company treated them during this tough time. In particular, they're going to remember how they were treated by their supervisor. And we love, as a company, helping companies attract and retain employees that are engaged. And we know, and I trust you know, that engaged employees, they work harder, they perform the best, and they stay the longest. So isn't that what you want for your team? And so if you have supervisors who lack some of the soft skills, some of which Quinn has made reference to, but they lack some of the soft skills they need to fully engage their employees, let's talk. Let us hear from you. Quinn, I'm going to also make your contact information here, and let me encourage those who are participating this morning. Reach out to Quinn. Here's Quinn's contact information that will be included in the follow-up email as well. Quinn, as expected, you did a fantastic job of explaining something, and I learned more about emotional intelligence in this time with you than I have in a number of other things. So well done, Quinn.
Thanks, Mike. It was a pleasure being here with you and Rhonda, and I'll throw in an extra plug because Rachel's one of my favorite speakers. So anyone who, if you enjoy this week, you'll really enjoy next week as well. She's phenomenal, and I look forward to hearing what she has to say as well.
Well, thank you, Quinn. And Rhonda, again, always enjoy spending time with you week in and week out on this. Well done. Thank you for being with us again this morning.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you, Quinn. Great topic. Something I'm near and dear to my heart is EQ and all of the emotional, touchy-feely kind of things you need to do with your employees to make for a good business environment. So it fit right in with everything that we work with day in and day out. So thank you, Quinn, and thanks for putting it together, Mike.
You bet. You may have heard the bird clock in the background. That means it's top of the hour. So I thank you all for spending this hour with us. We hope this has been meaningful to you. So on behalf of Bench Builders, go out, be safe, stay informed, and we hope to see you back here this time next week. Take care, everybody.